So for our lovely Miss M, she was just doing a little bit of play earlier, so she's nice and winded. She just went to go get a little drink of water. So I know Mom had mentioned, do you think that Miss M has some anxiety? So I would typically recommend checking with your veterinarian as well whenever you're thinking about potentially including medication. So obviously there are supplements. Some of the resources I had sent along did have some of those supplements as an option. Remember, those supplements on their own, just like medication on their own, will not resolve behavioral trouble or anxiety. So just like with us, if you're having some difficulty with depression or anxiety or post-traumatic stress, remember that also speaking to a therapist or a counselor of some kind is going to also be immensely beneficial. So a lot of times, if we don't dive into what is causing the behavior, we may never really get a good root as the cause, and therefore we never really get over the difficulty. So I always tell people that if you're ever going to be doing medication, that you can't just do it solely medication and hope that magically the pup will resolve all their troubles. If your pup tends to be an anxious boy or girl, I have seen gorgeous change and success in pairing medication with training. So remember, training not in the sense of basic obedience and working sit down stays, but for example, behavior modification or in classical and operant conditioning, and then not to mention also sort of, again, pairing some of these new feelings with something the pup finds valuable. So for example, if your babe is feeling really overwhelmed and we're just telling her to go sit, the problem there is even though she might be able to offer a sit position or behavior when she's feeling rather comfortable, when there's a heightened sense of anxiety or overwhelmed feelings, making them be stationary, it can sometimes create the exact opposite behavior. So I know we had mentioned movement behaviors, which are where these find its come into play. Maybe even doing like a hand touch where she would target your hand and you'd go yes and feed. If she's not familiar with hand touches, don't worry. But I have seen a lot of really nice change in some of my more sensitive students. So remember, anxiety, if let's say your world is always a 5 and above, but you can really only tolerate 3 and below, anxiety can come out as exuberance. So for Miss M, you can see when she comes in, even though she was home and she just drove over, I know for some dogs, car travel is overwhelming. There was another little video that I had mentioned about car travel and when I sent along some resources. But if Miss M gets easily flustered, even when something small in the environment changes, she could be a good candidate for, again, some sort of medication through your vet. Where then that paired with what we're working on will create a better playing field for her to feel more comfortable and therefore more reliable and less anxious and jumpy. So remember how I mentioned those F's earlier with the other little puppy, Mr. Z. So your F's can consist of fidgeting and also, for example, getting a little bit over exuberant, but those could be symptoms of anxiety. So if you're not as familiar with dog stress signals, Miss M does give several. So there's the excessive itching, which even when I had no harness on her and no collar, she was still doing the displacement behaviors of the exaggerated skill. So displacement behaviors are typically normal dog behaviors, but they're either out of context or exaggerated to the point where they're almost a little bit like compulsive. So for example, when our little lady, she is doing a much better job, though, taking food and being much more responsive sooner. But remember that for her, this comfort range when someone comes over, the reason she might be having such a hard time is I know for some, obviously rehearsing something for years means that when we try to change it up on them, that's a lot of practice they'd have to go backwards on. So sometimes prevention, so using your environment to manage what she can and can't do, is step number 1. So if our lovely lady couldn't handle being on leash and in the same bubble with the new person poking in, we may not want to set her up for that difficult of a starting point. So remember, like when you first started learning how to drive a car, you didn't instantly go from knowing nothing right onto the highway. So sometimes we're expecting behavior to happen even though our dog has maybe never rehearsed it before needing it. So this is where if your babe can't handle a situation, it's better for them to actually prevent the rehearsal of the failure. So if Miss M, when your daughter comes over, or if company's coming over, so I know you mentioned you're going to have guests, is if there is going to be company, make sure that Miss M could do something else in a different zone. You may want to implement doggy doors or a baby gate scenario while you're also practicing giving her outlets that would be beneficial for her to work on while you can't help her. So for example, Miss M just went and grabbed for a bone. So I would highly recommend to have rotation through the different chew items. Remember that also when your babe is really overwhelmed or anxious or really exuberant is to give them outlets. So chewing is one. Another great outlet would be licking. So let's say, for example, your babe loves to, for example, lick on a Kong or a Topple or a slow feed bowl. All of those options would be very good for Miss M. So she has an outlet other than the new thing as the target. Obviously, too, expending a little bit of energy prior to the thing happening can be helpful. So if let's say your puppy comes in hot and heavy and they've got a lot of extra oomph, we were just playing with Miss M. She was doing a little bit with the flirt pole earlier today. So even before sometimes working on softer behaviors, I sometimes like to get those moments of play and getting that out. If your babe, for example, is having a harder time with something, remember to break it down into attainable steps. Ready? Miss M's doing a great job. Ready? Find it. So if let's say, for example, your babe is doing a great job doing other skill sets that they do better with, definitely work your criteria based off of that setup. So for our little Miss M, she's like, this bone is delicious. We want to make sure that as she's practicing, she's again rehearsing the skills you'd want her to get good at. So if let's say company coming over equals a lot of anxiety and excitement, we may find there's a few different options out there for supplements. There's a product called Adaptil, which is a pheromone-based product that comes in a plug-in, a spritzer, and a collar. There's also the option to, for example, use another great option would be to have, there's another brand called Composure. Composure is another great option too, and I'll give her a little break from her bone. She's been doing a really nice job with it. We'll take a little breather and she can enjoy some more of that in a moment. But Composure is another great brand that for some of my students has worked well for their dogs. It is designed by a group of veterinarians. So it is a little bit more regulated than some of the other supplements you can sometimes find that are hemp or CBD oil type medications. Well, not medications, sorry, supplements. So if you're a little uncertain, definitely check in with your vet and let them know, hey, this is what we've been sort of working on. This is what we've been discussing with the trainer. And then say, you know, I would really love to try maybe medication alongside with some behavior plans. Because remember, if it's just simply one or the other, remember basic obedience, like getting your sits, your downs, your stays. I always tell people that's a lot like learning a new language, which is great. So it's like learning French. But when, let's say, you need to have life skills in the sense of knowing how to swim, that's where more of, chewing is optional. That's where more of these dog-centric skills like find it or doing other behavior in the sense of those are going to come into play that are more beneficial for Miss M when she's a little bit unsure or a little too excited. So learning how to swim is going to be very beneficial, even though learning another language can be very nice. Having a safety skill like your swimming could then save you for down the road. So this is where basic obedience is lovely, but only if you're feeling comfortable enough to offer it. Nice job. So again, then we got a little itching. But if, for example, Miss M is stressed out, you would then be seeing like pacing, whining, sometimes howling and doing some other vocalizations. But you'll see that sometimes she has like the spatula tongue, which if you've never seen that, it's where their tongue kind of sticks out pretty heavily. And a lot of times when dogs are doing that, they're either been a lot of activity and they're actually overheating and you're dealing with actually a little bit of potential for heat stroke, so you want to be careful, or then it's a stress signal. So she hasn't been doing tons of activity where I'd be like, wow, she was really exercising heavy and that tongue should be like that. She sometimes comes walking in and she's almost got the spatula tongue. There's also, for example, So her pupils are rather dilated. She's panting a lot. She also has these very expressive wrinkles on her face. Those are typically stress signals. So I'm not saying that Miss M is going to keel over while doing doggy day school, but it is something that I would want to keep an eye on while she's home. What does her comfort range look like? What is her skill set like? If she doesn't have much for skills because she's never worked them, and now we're asking for that skill set on top of a distraction, then that might also be why Miss M is not doing as well as we were hoping. So obviously going to her bed and working a bit with that place behavior, that might be great, but only if she's feeling safe enough to offer it. So I would definitely check in with your vet and see what they're thinking potentially for some medications. Remember that there is sadly a bad rap around medication. Some people use it as the last resort, where I feel that if your dog is really struggling with anxiety and apprehensiveness and sort of really getting flustered, I think medication paired with a good behavior plan is well worth it, because again, you're helping your pup feel safe faster. So medication is not a bandage that you're plopping on a big wound. View medication as, again, remember, if let's say her world is a level 5 and above, and maybe Miss M can really only handle 3 and below, and then everything past that, she becomes over aroused and overwhelmed, then that means that her ability for learning is also out the window. But the benefit of doing medication and then pair it with some of the skill set is now Miss M could have a bigger window of feeling safe, which means she has a bigger window for retention and learning new skills. Because if, let's say, Molly is always, I'm sorry, Molly, that was my girl, is Molly. So every time I say Miss M, I think of my girl, Molly, but Millie. So if Miss Millie, is having a hard time with something, we really want to make sure that what we're working on is within her capabilities. Otherwise, whatever we're practicing might be moments for her to rehearse the thing you're not loving, which could be pummeling your guests. But if, let's say, that could be resolved by management and then start working these skills, that could be immensely helpful for her. But I would definitely make sure that we're giving her outs that are appropriate. So if right now management is your best friend, that might be a great place to start, where you can manage what Miss M can or can't do. So baby gates, using your leash in the home, maybe setting her up in a quieter part of the home with the TV on. Let your company or guests come in, let them decompress themselves and get situated, and then bring her in and out of that environment. But if when you bring her into it, she just explodes, that might be her saying, you know what, this is maybe too hard for me. So remember how behavior could be from those different F's. There's the fidget and fawn and, again, flight. Sometimes she could be having conflicted feelings where she's interested in the novelty, but she's overwhelmed. And then you almost get this mix of behavior where she doesn't know what to do with it. So when in doubt, give her the option you'd prefer, which in the beginning could be avoiding the setup if she can't handle it, and then start to give her skills you'd rather. So lick mats, slow feed bowls, things that could keep her occupied in that bubble, and then bring her in on equipment to work some of these little skills. So I know I mentioned in the beginning doing some find its when she's in and around the distraction, but if she's too far gone, you might have to give her more of this ability to be further from the thing she finds difficult. But I'll send you a few other little resources too for her that you might find beneficial. So we'll just do a couple little find its, and I know we were blabbing about some of the medication potentials, but I would definitely recommend something like that for your babe, so we can help her blossom into the way she feels when she's most safe, but all the time. So nice job, Miss M. Excuse me. Good job. So we'll give her a little break from that, and we'll work a few more skills.